Hello, everyone. I am Iron Vigilance, part of Void Edge, and with me I have Alter, who is my partner in creating Ghost Recon Abyss Walker.
Yeah, more like partner in crime, but yeah, we'll take that as well.
So, together we decided to form a team called Void Edge, and with Void Edge, we decided to go ahead and create the best parts of the storytelling from the Tom Clancy universe and a little bit of our own storytelling from our own unique works of art and decided to bring them to life. But currently, our main focus right now is the rework of the Clancy verse for Ghost Recon Abyss Walker.
Yeah, going into this, we kind of saw that Ubisoft wasn't necessarily going through and treating the Clancy verse with the amount of care that we would have liked to have seen, which is kind of a shame. In the last probably 7 8 years, everything regarding Tom Clancy's name on it has very rapidly gone downhill. In regards to games, the direction those games have gone, and obviously, clearly, storytelling.
Absolutely, absolutely. So as you can see here on our screen, we already have the Abyss Walker timeline. So with Abyss Walker, obviously it's a fan-made series that we're gonna have multiple episodes for. We haven't planned out how many episodes just yet, or how long each episode will be, but because it's fan made, obviously some ideas are gonna have to get retconned for our ideas to work with continuity errors and all that. So going back, we're basically reworking the timeline from the very beginning. So everything pretty much like post Ghost Recon Wildlands has been like scrapped and reworked. So on my screen here, you can see the three main games that we've basically retconned are Rainbow Six Siege. We're gonna get into each of these reasons why. Uh, Ghost Recon Breakpoint and Ghost Recon Frontlines. This obviously doesn't need any sort of explanation as to why we're retconning Frontlines.
Yeah, Siege chiefly. There's a number of reasons why we chose to go through and retcon Rainbow Six Siege. Chief among them being that Rainbow Six ended up getting misused, at least in our opinion. If we're going just based on what is canon in the storyline, number one, my primary issue with how Rainbow Six was handled was that Rainbow Six was deactivated in, I believe, 2012
Yes,
in Vegas, which didn't exactly make a whole lot of sense to us because the primary reason for Rainbow being deactivated was that global terrorism was at an all-time low. Now, both of us have, a decent bit of knowledge in regards to, the military and maybe a tad bit of knowledge as how, counterterrorism operations work. Now, to us, that didn't make a whole lot of sense deactivating them, mainly due to the fact that just 3 years later, it was reactivated because then global terrorism was at an all time high, which we believe that, it wouldn't have been had they actually kept Rainbow Six activated. And then going into, specifically, its operators and how Rainbow Six actually operated, in Siege. And this is obviously going to be an issue that a lot of the community even has had recently about Rainbow Six. It's the operators, it's how the unit goes through and portrays itself. As of late, especially with the Six Invitational event a couple years ago, I believe at this point,
Tournament of
they
Champions.
yeah, they essentially went through and put these tier one operators in a stadium for everybody to see. That would never happen.
Ever.
Like that is not something that happens in the real world. Sure, you might see, hell, even a few years ago, CAG, DevGru, HRT, and a few other units were doing a live fire exercise in LA.
I remember
That
that.
is about the only thing you would ever see. But you're not going to be seeing these operators, setting up in a stadium for the world to go through and view how they go through and and actually conduct these operations. That is never going to happen.
Eh,
And my personal issue, uh, going further with this, is the operators themselves. Um, how vigilance. I'm sure you're aware that at one point, in order to go through and bolster their numbers in siege, they actually went through and essentially taking on an entire PMC.
yeah, Night Haven.
Yeah, which came with more than a few operators that realistically would never be accepted into a unit like this. Hell, there have even been a couple of operators in the unit over the last couple of years that actually don't have any operational experience whatsoever. Aroni, which I like to refer to as essentially a knockoff Lara Croft, but nowhere near as badass. Uh, you had the albino operator, which certainly wouldn't happen. And then there was that one operator that is, for all intents and purposes, the Kool-Aid Man.
Oh,
Most of these people would never be accepted into Rainbow if John Clark was still running it. Hell, if anything, he'd probably laugh
excuse me.
them out of his office.
So keep in mind, like, we understand that Rainbow is like a multinational counter-terrorist organization, so we know that everybody from different walks of life would definitely be accepted into the ranks of Rainbow. But our main focus was that due to the gameplay constraints that Ubisoft had in place, uh, this diversified the overall story. We personally don't have a problem with Rainbow Six Siege from a gameplay perspective, but from a lore perspective, a lot of what they put out doesn't make a lot of sense. Um, so that's why we go ahead and just say that Rainbow Six Siege is off the table for us. With, with some elements of Rainbow Six Siege are still in place for this timeline, but we'll go over that in a second. Next on the Retcon uh, list is Ghost Recon Breakpoint. So, just to be clear, Aurora still does exist. Skeltech does exist. Nomad and the Kingslayer team do exist here, but they never set foot on Aurora here. Um, what doesn't exist is the Wolves. They do not exist, and Walker does not exist in this timeline. He just never happened anywhere. This whole betrayal thing never happened. And the reason we did that was because we felt just like the way Rainbow Six was misinterpreting how Tier 1 assets were used. There also has been some sort of a lot of disagreements with the way that they portrayed the Ghost using Walker, essentially. So the biggest problem right off the bat are the Wolves, right? I mean, I know it's not the way it is now, but like back then when they were still advertising this game using John Bernthal, they said like every single wolf was like an ex-ghost, like each and every single one of them.
Nope, not possible.
Not possible because first of all, we've all played the game. We've all seen how many wolves are running around the island. Even because just to put into perspective, Ghost Recon or just the ghosts, their numbers at any given time is what within like a couple hundred
Yep,
active people at a time, just a
yep.
couple hundred, right? And if you expect me or anyone to believe like that the amount of people who left the ghosts, retired, or for whatever reason they're just no longer part of the team, just each and every single one of those people since their inception back in the early 2000s just to suddenly decide to up and go into arms and then just join the wolves, like that number still doesn't add up to like how many people have ever been a ghost. So automatically,
Absolutely.
absolutely. So that timeline, so that whole thing with the wolves is not happening. And speaking of consistency, like Walker himself, like his whole reason for betraying the country, like just never made sense to us, like whatsoever.
Yep. Like how, four dudes that have gone through and talked to, dudes in special operations, not even necessarily just tier one teams like CAG and DevGru, CISAD, so on and so forth, but dudes that have just talked to special operations guys in general, whether that's Green Berets, whether that's Navy SEALs, MARSOC, 75th, so on and so forth. Those kind of guys are not the types of dudes that would go through and betray their country to that extent. Now, granted, some of those dudes might have their own qualms with, how the United States does things, but the main thing that we recognized is that these dudes don't get to where they are in special operations by, hating their country
Ever.
or anything like that. Anybody that has met guys like this know that these are the types of dudes that would not only lay down their lives for their brothers, but also they'd lay down their life for their country. They believe in what they are doing. These are not the types of dudes that get in like special operations. You're not going to get into a team like that on a whim. That just doesn't happen.
Mm-mm.
So, for Ubisoft to expect us to believe that, in canon there are like maybe 200, 250 ghosts or wolves rather, uh, in that particular unit, that never made sense.
Yeah, especially no, definitely not. And they were just like all over the place with like his reason. Like at first it was like, oh, his team dying, then his comrades dying, then the fact that they didn't back him up when he just killed a lieutenant in self defense, which at the end of the day wouldn't really be his fault.
Mm-hmm.
Like, just none of it seemed like anything the military would do in real life. Um, and overall, we just feel like that whole incident with like Walker taking over Aroa would just not happen. So
Yep.
as of right now in this timeline, that is 100% retconned. Like I said, we're skipping over front lines for very obvious freaking reasons. So we're gonna go ahead and get started with where our timeline does start. So our timeline starts. Well, episode one actually starts in the year 2033. So working about 15 years part of that, that's like, or no, 12 to about 12 years part of that. That's like what, the early 2020s.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
So
be around 2021 roughly.
yeah, so Future Soldier actually happened like in what year? Like 2024 or something?
Yes. Because Breakpoint ended up taking place about a year after the fact. Yeah.
Which is kind of weird because like they don't share the same technology. They just decide to run around with a bunch of like airsoft gear, which still
Yep.
amuses me to this day.
Hell,
Um,
I run better gear than that, and we play paintball.
a lot of paintball. One of us is actually like a veteran on the team, so I'm just gonna leave it at that. But just a lot of this stuff amuses us. But this stuff right here, year one. So it all started with the satellite crash from Rainbow Six Siege. Like I said, we're not taking out everything. We're just taking out certain aspect that makes sense to us. So there was that satellite crash that happened during Extraction, even though we freaking hate that DLC for obvious reasons for storyline perspective. But that satellite did crash. But the only difference is it did not cause an infection. It was just covered in like this extraterrestrial type element. But that element was actually snagged up by an unknown person or organization. Uh, all this is going to be revealed later on in the series, but as of right now, somebody just came by to the satellite and just picked up like a large sample from it and ran off with it before the U.S. government came in and quarantined it. That's where this all started. Then about a year later, the white masks emerge and they buy the bioweapon from that unknown source and they just unleash it on the world. So that is another thing from Rainbow Six Siege that we decided to keep into the story, but this time they're more involved in our timeline. So no space zombies, none of that nonsense. That's another thing that we should have added to the retcon was Rainbow Six Extraction, but that's kind of self-explanatory, along with
Yeah.
Frontlines. We're not going to get into that. This is not supposed to be a rant video. Um, but if you have any concerns, you can just hit us up. But the white masks, they buy the bioweapon from the unknown source. They unleash it on the world because of the crazed fanaticism. They never actually went ahead and explicitly explained why they did this, so I guess we can just leave it vague as well. So this
Yeah.
is gonna go into the DLC for Ghost Recon Breakpoint, where Aurora was hit by the same gas that was used by the White Masks. I know Alter played the DLC for.
Yeah, I did. Now, granted, that was actually a very good DLC. Storyline was relatively solid. The missions there were good. But that aside, we are going through and using this gas as essentially a catalyst for a few of our events here, and this is also kind of going into the division as well. In our timeline, the division does still get activated. However, it's not for the same reasons as in the game. Um, you know, After the white masks go through and essentially unleash this gas, it does wind up messing up the United States for quite a bit. And from there, the division ends up getting activated to go through and help contain all of this and essentially help to maintain order, which in the end they do succeed in that.
Yes. So you want to go ahead and tell these people why exactly we're not using the dollar flu?
Yes. So the dollar flu, while it is a good idea, and really the division is probably the only good thing that Ubisoft has done in the last 10 years,
Mm-hmm.
um, we're not using the dollar flu primarily because the division actually does take place inside of its own continuity. Now, the reason for that is the fact that the dollar flu ended up taking out, if I remember correctly, roughly 90 to 95% of the world's population.
Jesus.
Yeah. So at that point, there's not much you can really do with the other franchises if the division was canon. Past that, you really couldn't really do anything after that.
No.
Most people aren't going to be too concerned with, Russia's not going to be too concerned with starting a war, with the United States, or,
Terrorism.
yeah, like they're not really going to be too concerned with terrorism or anything like that because at that point, the world's essentially just done.
It's done.
So that is the very definition of an apocalyptic scenario. So we just did away with that entirely, but we did still want to keep aspects of the division alive here.
Yeah. So the reason why we didn't put that under the Redcon list was because for the majority, everything they did is still 100% canon in our story. Only difference is instead of the dollar flu, it's just that chemical the white masks used. Um, so like all the research data you picked up in the division games, like that's 100% in there. But I didn't know that it actually like affected like that many people in the world. Like I thought like it just crippled the world economy to the point where everything was just at a standstill. I didn't know like we were that close to just being extinct. That's crazy.
Yeah, given the fact that they had you running around New York and DC just smoking people left and right, it didn't necessarily portray the fact that it did affect that percentage of the world's population, but yeah, it definitely messed up a lot more than what the games kind of portray.
Yeah, I mean, what I did like about the division was like it did portray that um, America did have like a final contingency plan to try to keep things in order just in case America ever did fall. And in our time,
Absolutely.
yeah, in our timeline, it absolutely did fall, and so did a lot of major governments around the world, which is where we go into 12 to 15 years later. We're just gonna actually delete this, and we're just gonna say year 12. So 10 years after the White Masks decided to send the world into a biochemical nuclear wasteland, or whatever you want to call it. The world did recover, and unfortunately, as the world was recovering, there was like a lot of homeless people. There was a lot of people out of work. There was a mass lower class essentially, and these corporate fat cats up top decided to start businesses taking advantage of these people all around the world. It wasn't just in America, it wasn't just in Russia, it was literally everywhere. Like there was just these government organizations and corporations and companies out here that were trying to quote unquote help people, but at the end of the day, they were just ripping them off, putting them into further debt, and just to line their pockets up, right? And
Yep.
this is where things start to get interesting because it, in response to this, in response to the clear, blatant capitalist monopoly that's been happening all I'm using a bunch of political buzzwords. I actually know nothing about politics. But yeah, just a blatant disregard of human life right here, like pissed so many people off to the point where there was mass riots, there was organized crime, there was militias, anarchists, rebels, insurgents. Like you can see the list right here, and they all started fighting back. And this does include, yes, the true patriots. And if you guys remember Rainbow Six Patriots, like you guys recognize his name. Man, I really wish they came out with that game. Like I really wish they went ahead with that.
Same. That game had a lot of really, potentially good concepts that,
Not potentially, it
that,
was good concepts. That's why we're including it.
yeah. No, I mean, hell, like, let's take Modern Warfare 2019, for example.
Yeah,
Some of the elements that were in that game would have been explored, years prior, had Ubisoft actually had the balls to go through and release this game. Going through the whole, the reveal trailer. Me and you both remember that, where, you had to go through and essentially fire on NYPD in order to go through and stop them from killing a suicide bomber with a dead man switch.
I
And
love that.
that is not something that I have seen any other game really have the balls to do.
Absolutely
Something like
not.
that is something that you're just not going to see that unless somebody winds up going through and making a custom mission in Arma 3 or something like that. But that's not something that most game developers have the courage to really do anymore, and that's kind of a crying shame these days.
And you know the complete irony of all that? I heard that they had to shut it down because of controversy.
Yeah,
That
yeah, I
was,
do remember that.
and that's the ironic part because that it was meant to be controversial, but yet like they went ahead and just faltered through it. I mean, I really wish they went ahead, but if Rainbow Six Patriots was a canonical game in the timeline that did get released, this is where it would have taken place in our timeline because we found out that like in later trailers that they released that they wanted to essentially have the true Patriots basically bomb a bunch of like companies and corporations and a bunch of CEOs that were like defaulting on people's payments and stuff like that, making them homeless and stuff. And these guys were essentially fighting for like the lower class, and that just made so much sense to us that we had to include it in our timeline. But I don't know if we're gonna include like all the really badass moments where things get a little controversial. As you said, Alter, um, where they decided to fire on NYPD because they didn't have enough time to tell them in the middle of a firefight not to start shooting at the suicide bomber with the dead man switch. Uh, but moving on, we got the fact that as these militias were trying to be contained and being put down, we found out that these riots weren't just not only instigated, but they were also being armed. And this kind of inspiration, like for me personally, was like, again, I know nothing about politics. I'm not politically aligned, um, but I remember like seeing like these Twitter posts about like these bricks being left on the side of the road, like these pallets of bricks during like the riots a couple of years back. You remember that, Alter?
Yeah, yeah, I remember that. A lot of people with tinfoil hats going through and coming out of the woodwork there.
Yeah, saying like the CIA or whatever like intentionally left that so that the rioters would start to get violent and stuff like that. Like we kind of took that into consideration when we want to get into like the more blacker side of society, where it's like when it's no longer a gray area, now it's more of like, yeah, these government entities are operating from the background and they're actually arming these rioters to start things up. And not only are these militias being armed, but they're being armed with high tech equipment, stuff like stuff like that can disable military equipment, like drones, cloaking, uh, that can hide you from infrared. Basically, top of the line, like tier one operator type stuff that nobody on the open market should have, not even on the black market. Like this is stuff that no person should ever have in their possession for any reason, if
Yep, absolutely.
unless you had clear intentions of rebelling against your government, which these guys did. And this is when the GST was sent to investigate because things got a little out of hand in some parts of the world, and they were sent to respond to that. But when they conducted their SSCs, they found out that some of the technology that they were picking up. I didn't actually include this in the timeline, but I forgot to write this down. But when they were fighting back against some of the militia, the Ghost's technology was actually disabled because of this new technology. Like their cloaking didn't work, their cross comms were shut off, their radios stopped working, their drones were used against them, and they were trying to figure out like why. Like even Bodark didn't have this type of technology. I don't think, did they?
No, they did not. Not as far as I know. Bodark really just had the same, level of stuff compared to the GST. Now, assuming that they had, EMP grenades, which were a thing in Future Soldier,
Mm-hmm.
uh, that would have really been the closest that they would have gotten to this. But nothing on the level that some of these militias and standing militaries were actually getting their hands on. This stuff is a hell of a lot more large scale. Uh, this is just complete area denial of a ghost. An area a ghost decides to go through and step into an area where they've got this kind of stuff. His shit isn't gonna work. Period.
Absolutely not. Uh, and it's not like Bodark or Voron from Splinter Cell and stuff like that, where they had this technology that mirrors our stuff, right? This is more along the lines of like this stuff was meant to counter our stuff. It's not a
Yep.
mirror; it's a counter. It's asymmetrical. Like this is the rock to our scissor, if that makes
Yep.
sense.
Which
And
is arguably more dangerous.
100% more dangerous. This is not a symmetrical warfare. Like we're dealing with something that is meant to fight ghosts and other tier 1 teams out there from around the world that are using similar technology like Bodark. And this is when they figure out that after finding evidence that some of the technologies is extraterrestrial, meaning that this is not from our world, the government traces it back to the satellite crash from many years ago and finds that the samples that was collected from the division 10 years ago, back when they were conducting their studies and they were like trying to figure out like where this gas came from, they actually figured out that the same technology that was in the gas came from the satellite, and it's still the same technology that's in the stuff that they're using against the ghosts. So now they're starting to see a pattern. Now they're starting to figure out that a single entity is behind all these attacks and the world going to complete shit for the last 12 years. So we got a new unit out here called the SKAR unit. So what that stands for is the Special Kinetic Applications Response Unit. Yes, Special Kinetics Application Response Unit. And it's not formed by just a single unit. It's actually formed realistically by a composition of people that would realistically get stuff done. So it's not like like the Ret team from from Ghost Recon Breakpoint. If you remember Nomads and Walker's Past, how they were part of something called the Retribution or Retaliation team, right? They call themselves a Red Team. It's nothing like that, which I still don't understand why it was called a Red Team. They could have just sent in the Ghost and just be done with it. But this SKAR unit the name does serve a purpose. So the unit composition comprises of a single fire team from the Ghost called AFO Stalker, which a lot of you guys who've been following me on Reddit have seen what these guys look like, and their most recent trailer that dropped. A squadron of fighters. You guys are gonna love this. Like diehard Tom Clancy fans are gonna love this. But we are including a fighter and transport pilot from the Hawks program, like a squadron of them. And if you guys remember the lore, they worked hand in hand with Ghost Recon in the past, canonically. So it'd be almost criminal not to include these guys. So definitely they're going to be in there for close air support and transportation with using experimental aircraft, fixed wings, and rotary airframes. Plus, they're going to have a small crew of intelligence agents from the ISA, and they're also going to have a small skeleton crew of support staff and enablers. These are just regular soldiers and regular people. They didn't go through selection. They didn't do any of that crazy stuff. These are like normal soldiers that whose job it is to support special operations units, uh, like cooks, truck drivers, logistics personnel, ammo guys, supply guys, uh, everything in between, right?
Yeah.
Because realistically, these guys can't just go into a country, set up shop, and then just start shooting things. Like realistically, there was a plan in place. There was, you know, these guys being together. You got your intel, you got your support, you got your communications, you got your close air support and all that. Like
Hmm.
nobody ever fights alone. Like that's just unrealistic. This is the most realistic way we can actually like comprise the SKAR unit. And
Right.
finally, currently on the Patreon, I do have a hidden scene for a work in progress that I'm doing, where they're searching the through this where everyone's getting all this technology from, and their search leads them to an uprising that just happened, and it's happening in Guyana, South America. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Uh, so these insurgents are being investigated by the campus as well. Another diehard Tom Clancy fan is gonna love that. Uh, this is more Alter's thing because he's the one who introduced this idea.
Hmm.
So just in case nobody knows who the campus is, could you let these guys know?
Yeah. So going into into what the campus is. The campus is essentially a unit that was actually formed after Jack Ryan becomes president. Now, this is something that is relatively, I'm not necessarily going to say obscure, but, well, actually, no, that is actually the perfect word for this unit. It is relatively obscure, especially when you actually consider that, this particular unit never showed up in, in the games, right? And which, in my opinion, is honestly kind of criminal. But the campus is essentially a unit that was, stood up by Jack Ryan when he became president. Now, essentially, this particular unit basically served as an intelligence agency, but it was also a PMC as well. Uh, this particular unit is yeah, words, fuck. This particular unit, basically everybody involved in it is a walking black bar. So the campus essentially operates, under the cover of a financial trading company called Henley Associates, right? Now, that is what it looks like on the surface. It is just a financial trading institution for anybody that actually goes through and properly looks into this, But here's the beautiful thing: it essentially does zero public business whatsoever, nor is it known to have any clients, which is beautiful. Uh, so a lot of their funding, it looks legit on the surface, but the thing is, this particular unit, everybody that's involved in it, like I said, is a walking black bar. This unit, if I had to go through and compare it to anything, is for all intents and purposes rainbow. It's basically rainbow,
Yeah,
except they don't have to deal with any of the political red tape that Rainbow might have to deal with. If those of us that have heard of the Fifth Freedom, which, let's be honest here, most of us here have, it's essentially, third and fourth echelon's Fifth Freedom, except on a larger scale. They basically have an entire just filing cabinet full of presidential pardons. So if for whatever reason they end up running an operation where maybe somebody ends up getting arrested or so on and so forth, they can just pull one of those out, sign the thing, and be done with it. They don't have to worry about any political backlash or anything like that because this unit does not officially exist. Any of any of the money that they end up making, uh, it just looks like your typical business transaction on paper. This unit does not officially exist. There is not a single written document in the possession of any government official that has a single word about it. No foreign intelligence agency has any way of finding them, as no one can trace any money to them. The campus also works outside of the federal budget process, so they don't necessarily have to worry about politicians going through and maybe sticking their nose where it shouldn't be. They have absolutely zero, you know, they have absolutely zero ties to the U.S. government whatsoever, aside from the fact that Jack Ryan was the one that stood it up in the first place. And the how they get paid, just in case you ever want to go through and figure that out, they end up getting paychecks that are direct deposited into whatever bank account that particular operator sets up.
Mm-hmm. So,
This unit is the very definition of classified,
but,
and that is the beautiful thing about the campus.
and honestly, it's like the more I think about it, it's like that these guys are everything that people in real life think that the CIA are. Like
Yeah.
everything that they think that the CIA does in real life, like these guys embody that in every
Yep.
aspect of it. I mean, they literally can do whatever the hell they want.
Hmm.
But I mean, as far as I've never gotten to the Jack Ryan series, so like I don't even know. Like, has there ever been anybody that like has officially gone rogue with that power?
More than likely. Given how large the Jack Ryan series is just in general, I actually haven't personally gone through all of it myself. Um, but as far as I know, I don't believe it's happened. But again, like I said, I haven't read through everything, so I'm not necessarily going to claim otherwise.
Yeah, but definitely, as you can see, they are going to make an appearance in our little series, and right now their current mission is that they're tracking that very same militia that's operating out of Guyana that the SKAR team is looking out after. And right now, they're not comparing notes. They're not talking to each other because, but believe it or not, in our timeline, the campus doesn't know who the ghosts are, and vice versa, right? Like they're both so classified by their own country that they're very well hidden from each other, and that's another thing that we're trying to bring back with this series is that we're trying to bring back that original um, message and feel of the Ghost Recon universe is that these guys are top secret. These guys don't just walk around in airsoft gear, showing their faces to everyone, like introducing themselves to the civilians and just talking to people. Like these guys are invisible. They are walking phantoms on the battlefield. They are walking superstitions, right? Like they are everything that a bad guy feels. Like they are living supernatural beings on the battlefield, and that's what
Yep.
we're trying to bring back. And if you guys check out that Patreon that I spoke of earlier, you're gonna see exactly what I'm talking about. Because there is an instance where something like that definitely happens, where these guys are quite literally myths. And this whole first episode that we're about to release, on a later date. We don't have a set release date, but it's not anytime soon. But when that first episode drops, what we want the viewers to feel, or what we want the viewers to feel, is basically like looking at the ghost from an outside perspective. The only way you see Top Secret is if Top Secret is hidden from the viewers, from my own personal perspective. Like, you can't just say, oh, these guys are top secret, then all of a sudden everyone's on board with that. Everyone understands that. No, that's not how it works. We have to show the viewers how top secret works, and then they understand why these guys are so feared on the battlefield. And that's something I'm looking forward to when you and I release this, Alter. So now,
Absolutely.
so now from here, they trace the shipment to Eastern Europe, and this is where our story starts. And hopefully, when you guys keep up with us on Reddit or other social media platforms that we may release this on, you guys are gonna be right there with us, and it's gonna be an awesome ride. Do you have any last minute things you want to tell these guys before we roll out?
Yeah. Kind of going into why we're doing this, and why we have this production company, Void Edge. The main thing that we basically both agreed on whenever we did go through and start Void Edge is this: we wanted to go through and tell stories, and be able to essentially tell stories that most companies are either number one, too afraid to do, or number two, just don't want to.
Or too greedy to tell.
Exactly. So, with us, this isn't the only thing that we're working on. We do have, a few other things that we are working on, for this production company. For those of you that might follow me on Instagram or wherever, you already know that I'm working on reentry. But, all in all, we're wanting to go through and tell stories that, for the most part, are thought provoking, or, in this case, if they're based on something else, we want to be, faithful to what we feel that source material should already be faithful to. And that's kind of what we're trying to go through and portray here with this Ghost Recon project is, a return to form, a return to what we feel the Clancy verse should have been doing for the last, almost 10 years at this point. But,
Yeah,
obviously we know how, that's been going over the last few years, and we were tired of seeing it. We were tired of seeing the legacy of a good man, continuously tarnished time and time again.
100%. Like, we understand that. You know, we talk about a lot about the Clancy verse, and we do understand that Tom Clancy did not actually write some of the novels like Ghost Recon. That was like another author using his name. But regardless, that storytelling was amazing back when we feel like that it was more about telling the story than it was about trying to turn a video game into a cash grab. Um, because there was a story there, and we felt like they just did nothing with it. And we're not doing this because we hate Ubisoft. We're doing this because we loved Ubisoft
Mm-hmm.
as they once were, and we're trying to basically show people like what it could have been, and we're trying to bring that back to the fans. Um, yes. One last thing. So a lot of you guys who've watched my trailer that I had to drop on my profile, some of you may notice that there was a particular strange character at the very end of my trailer uh, that looked a little different than the rest of the characters. I'm not going to say who, because if you guys know who I'm talking about, then you know where this is going. And you guys know why, or you guys probably noticed why me or Alter haven't said anything about this yet. Just know that we fully know that this is a subject that wants to be talked about, but we are not saying anything at the moment for very obvious reasons. You guys are just gonna have to sit tight and see where this story goes with that subject. But but we got very big plans for everything that's coming. Like, don't worry. Like, we already have everything mapped out, and once you see what's coming, it's gonna be awesome.
Yep.
All right. So one last time. If you guys want to see how everything's going, if you guys want to keep up with the projects, we are consistently uploading content to the Patreon. So it's not like once in a while. It's like I think like the most recent one was like a few days ago when I like uploaded this work in progress gift that I was doing. Um, and pretty soon I'll be uploading this timeline that you see right in front of you on your screen to the Patreon itself, so that you guys can take a look at it for yourselves in person. Pretty soon, this whole thing is going to be off the YouTube channel, and it's going to be strictly on the Patreon page. And the reason we do that is because we're going to redo this whole podcast thing, but we're gonna condense it down to like a 30-second video and have like a voice actor or actress read off some lines for us. And we want you guys that are truly fans of what we're doing to basically have like something straight from the developers for yourselves instead of the people of YouTube, right? The people of YouTube can have the YouTube stuff, but the Patreon is for the true fans. Like, if you're gonna give us, money to support us, we're gonna give you something good back. And this essentially is like one of the biggest gifts that we can give you, is like our thought process straight from our mouths to you guys. So that's it for me. Alter, you got anything left?
No, I think we're good.
All right. So hopefully you'll hear from us soon, and yeah, we'll see you guys as soon as this first episode drops.